So hi everyone, welcome to DFEND 2.0. After today, we only have 4 lessons left. You'll receive an email after today's DFEND call about our recipe book. It will have some recipe templates and directions for submitting your recipe, as well as if you want a free recipe book sent to you once we get it compiled. We are excited to welcome back Dr. Brittany Allman. She's going to talk to us about diet and exercise, what to eat and when. And I think it's my understanding that this is a topic near and dear to your heart. And at the end, because last time I didn't get Britt's or Dr. Allman's course did not record on my computer. Hopefully it will work this time. And she'll put her social media contact information up so you can follow her and learn more about the exciting work she does. So I'm just going to mute myself and take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. I am, of course, excited to be here. Like Jamie said, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And part of the reason is because this is where my training was for my PhD. And it is so incredibly important not only for exercise and performance, but for the general population and overall health. And I hope that you'll be able to get a picture of that as we work our way through. So if you were on my call the last time, I do like to be interactive. I like to get a sense of where you are and what you're thinking, what you know about the topic currently, and what you're going to put to practice as a result of this conversation. So if you could do your best to stay engaged and be active in the chat, that will be great. So I will be talking about nutrient timing. And I'd like to start off by asking you what you currently believe to be true about timing your food intake relative to exercise. So if you could type that in the chat, like whatever you think or whatever you believe right now to be true, what you should or what you shouldn't do, anything that comes to mind. I have no clue. Yep. Don't eat before swimming. That's fair. Says it doesn't matter. It's only before exercise. Intermittent fasting might be key. Try not to eat after 6 p.m. 30 minutes, but it depends. Good for post-workout. Exercise on an empty stomach. Exercise in the morning. Yeah, so a lot of these are correct, and then there are some that are influenced by what people in the media say, so media vocals, and we'll get to a lot of these topics actually, so it's going to be really interesting, this conversation. And I wanted to focus my conversation on the eating around the window of exercise, so before, during, and after exercise, but also what we call pre-sleep or nighttime eating, because these are 2 really controversial topics, and there's a whole gamut of research that shows what you should and what you shouldn't do. There's an entire spectrum. So I'm going to begin with exercise, and I know we already talked about this, so it's not necessary to put it in the chat anymore, but I saw a lot with that you shouldn't eat 30 minutes before swimming. You shouldn't eat before exercise. Some people talked about intermittent fasting. And really what I want to say before I get into anything is that it's all context related. So the entire conversation here matters. What matters most is your why and why you're eating or choosing not to eat, or what you're eating before exercise or around exercise. Before we go any further though, we do have to operationally define nutrient timing. And it's just a planned alteration of how and when you eat your food to promote either health, performance, exercise performance, or body composition, which is your body fat and your lean mass or your muscle mass. And this is super important because all the strategies that you would potentially use are based on how your body handles different types of food at different times. And so at no point during the day does your body handle that respective food or that respective macronutrient, your carbs, fats, and proteins, compared to other times of the day. because there's so many fluctuations in things like hormones and your movement throughout the day, your energy expenditure, all the things. Now, the goal of nutrient timing and intentionally timing your nutrients throughout the course of the day, and specifically for exercise, is nutrient partitioning. And basically that's a big word for saying, where am I sending my nutrients? What tissues am I sending my nutrients to? So muscle, fat, brain, all those things. Also improved health, improved body composition. There's a ton of research in this area. And then improved athletic performance. Timing your nutrients can be really important for improved athletic performance and really just performance in exercise, specifically if you're thinking about things like supplements that are going to enhance your performance, like caffeine and all that stuff. Really important to think about and consider timing. And then enhanced workout recovery. There's some really cool research that we'll dig into just on the surface level that looks at muscle recovery specifically from exercise and how we can properly time protein to be able to recover for the next day. So this whole concept is important because if you regularly perform exercise, it can be, and in most situations, if you're properly fueling, an ideal environment for optimizing body composition. So you should be able to minimize your fat and increase your muscle gain if you're doing it correctly and fueling properly and specific to timing. But the wrong foods at the wrong times can sabotage all of this work. So it's really important to get a grasp of what you should do. Now, during exercise, a lot's happening, and this is going to provide us context with why we should time around exercise. So what's called muscle glycogen, which is basically carbs that are stored in your muscle, is depleted. And this is specific to higher intensity exercise. So of note, if you're just going out there and having, a leisurely walk, this might not be relevant to you. But muscle glycogen, or the storage form of carbohydrates in your muscle, which provides the primary source of fuel for activity, is depleted. And you can see over here on the graph on the right, this y-axis, or the up and down vertical axis, that is your muscle glycogen levels. So with exercise time along the bottom. So with heavy exercise, you can see that muscle glycogen plummets. Muscle glycogen plummets with high intensity, heavy, vigorous exercise. With moderate exercise, it also does the same thing in terms of the absolute amount that it decreases, but it might take a little bit longer. And then light exercise, you can see it generally stays high just because we're not really tapping into those sources. Also, during exercise, your body becomes sensitive to insulin. We'll talk about insulin on the next slide, but insulin, if you want to think about it, is a storage hormone. And so what your body is doing, because we're losing so much of your primary fuel source, your body becomes sensitive to the hormone that's going to allow you to store those nutrients back in your muscle. We also are in what's called negative energy balance. So if you think about that, you're burning a whole lot of energy, but you're not at that time consuming energy. So you're in a negative energy balance. It allows it makes your body more sensitive to uptaking those nutrients, because I want to return my in to out balance back to normal. Your metabolism, of course, revs up because you're burning a whole lot of calories. And then this is my area of research that I love. What happens is that during exercise, you have an increase in the fat release from your fat cells. So all your fat cells in your body, with a whole bunch of hormones and enzymes and things like that, will progressively start to release fatty acids, all the storage forms of fat from your fat cell. And then the hope is that your muscle is active enough that those nutrients are then, or those constituents are then going to your muscle to be oxidized or burned. You can think about it as fat burn. So all of that stuff is happening during exercise. You can sort of get a picture of why it would be important to properly time your nutrients around exercise. So back to the insulin story. Insulin, like I said, is a storage hormone, so it's going to regulate nutrient entry into all the cells. And I like to think about it as a lock and key situation. So insulin is like the lock, and whatever's on the other side of the lock that you're trying to get into, let's say that's your muscle cells, is where I'm trying to store the nutrients that my body is taking in. And then glucose, or the sugars or carbohydrates that you eat, are the key. So if you have glucose floating around, if you have your lock available and sensitive, then you're able to take these glucose molecules and store them into the muscle so you can properly refuel. And with all of that in mind, if you have this whole process going on, it's going to be able to fuel muscle growth and muscle recovery, because you need glucose to be able to properly put your muscles back together, basically. All right. In this picture, I wanted to get just a bit of a deeper understanding before we get into the meat of it. Basically what happens is that your different parts of your body or different tissues of your body are more sensitive to that uptake of nutrients during different times. So at rest, when we talk about insulin and insulin sensitivity and our tissues' ability to uptake nutrients, at rest, my fat is more sensitive. So if I go through the whole day and I'm not terribly active, if let's say I'm taking in a huge amount of calories in general, or specifically carbohydrates, my body is going to be more sensitive to taking up those nutrients in adipose tissue or your fat tissue. So you're going to store more in those areas. Whereas with exercise, because of course you're using your muscle is becoming depleted of all those nutrients that we talked about, and it's becoming more sensitive to the effects of insulin. If I'm properly timing my glucose and my nutrient intake around exercise, then I'm going to be able to more readily store those nutrients in muscle compared to storing them in fat. So that's a really, really important delineation before we go any further, and just something to think about. So with all of that in mind, the main thing you want to focus on is carbs. Carbs should be the one thing that are manipulated. And typically what I recommend to people is that protein and fat intake throughout the day should relatively remain constant. We'll talk about that in a second, but you want to eat carbs with plenty of protein after exercise. And we'll talk about too, this window, this theoretical window of eating time after exercise. It's definitely a highly debated topic, but in terms of restorage of nutrients, you definitely want to get your carbs up to about 3 hours after exercise. So let's say you work out at 8 o'clock in the morning. You want to eat the bulk of your carbs throughout your 24-hour day between the end of that workout and 3 hours post. And this 3 hour window for carbohydrate replenishment varies on based on a ton of things. So it varies on the intensity of your activity, the harder that you push throughout your exercise, maybe the more carbs you want to take in, or the closer that window, the more narrow that window is. Things like your current fitness level, your amount of body fat. And I think we'll talk about some of that stuff in upcoming slides. And if you do this, it has what's called a protein sparing effect. So in general, if you're eating your carbs to replenish your muscles, then your muscles don't need as much protein at that given time. And it's gonna reduce your muscles' need to release those amino acids that it has stored, or the protein that it has stored in your muscle, to be able to fuel your recovery process. So basically, if you get your protein, your muscle isn't wasting away. Or I'm sorry, if you get your carbs, your muscle isn't wasting away. And then in general, we'll talk about this too. After that 3 hour window, your other meals should contain less carbohydrates, and we'll talk about the different types of carbohydrates that should be less. So you should consume higher carbohydrates in that 3 hour window. Like I said, if it's relatively intense physical activity, this is definitely specific to resistance training or some kind of high intensity exercise. It's not necessarily as important with things like low intensity activity, like cycling, if you're going at low to moderate intensity, or walking, things of that nature. But if you're really pushing hard, you might want to consider consuming carbohydrates during that window. And then higher carbs when you're relatively frequent with your the times of week that you do physical activity. So if you're exercising, 3 to 5, 6 days per week, you might want to consider upping your carbohydrate intake. If you have a high level of physical fitness and a lower level of body fat, and this is a loaded topic. And what I can say in general is that if you have a lower level of body fat, you're at rest, a bit less sensitive. Your fat is a bit less sensitive to taking up excess carbohydrates or carbohydrates in general. So we'll keep it at that. But you want to consume lower carbohydrates, but still consume carbohydrates after exercise, but lower carbohydrates if you're more sedentary, which means you're not as active on a daily basis, and if you have higher levels of body fat. So just things to consider there. Now, carbohydrates, I know we didn't even talk about that, but the carbohydrates that we're thinking about with exercise, there are three main ones. Fiber-dense carbohydrates, which are more of your vegetables, your fruits, and legumes. As a side note, legumes are beans, peas, chickpeas, things like that. But more of your fibrous forms of carbohydrates are good to eat whenever. So if we're talking about timing, these ones you can eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, doesn't matter when you eat them around exercise. You want to get them throughout the day. So like I said, limiting carbohydrates, this is only talking about other forms of carbohydrates that we'll go into later, but these guys you can eat whenever you want within reason. So you want to keep it at about a cup, typically is what I say, per meal. You can think about that also, a cup to 2 cups. You can think about that also with the size of 2 of your fists is what the general recommendation is. We also have starchy carbs, and these guys are the ones that you want to get in that 3-hour window after exercise. So quinoa, amaranth, sprouted grain breads, potatoes, yams, all those things that are going to be a quick form of carbs, but also provide a fair amount of things like fiber and other nutrients are going to be really good to eat after exercise. And then the last type of carbs are your refined sugary carbs. They're your more simple version of carbs. And these you want to eat very seldom. So they're good to have every once in a while. And in fact, if you're like an elite level athlete, or if you're really exercising hard, you might consider eating them more often. Sometimes you'll see like cyclists with the gels and things like that they're eating. But if you're not at that level, it's not necessary to have these as as part of your post-workout meal. But some examples here are raisins and nutrient bars, like you'll see Cliff bars, things like that. And then just sugar in general and honey and all that stuff. So you can eat these during or after exercise, but you want to eat them rarely. Now, outside of carbohydrates, protein is also a great thing to think about for the pre, during, and post-exercise window. And I won't get on this topic too long, but there's a huge myth about this anabolic window. Anabolic meaning building, and then window, like I've been talking about, is the window after exercise. So you would normally, it's funny because you see like bodybuilders and people that are lifting heavy weights, they always have a protein shake in hand. And that's because we make fun of them because they would like sprint home to eat their protein because they're worried that if they don't get their protein within this 30 minute to 2 hour window after working out, they're going to lose their muscle gains. And research has been consistently showing that this anabolic window might be like a mythical creature, because in general, what really matters is that you get your high quality protein throughout the day. So you can go without eating protein or without eating in general after exercise and not see the negative effects of muscle wasting and things like that. But I will say, with that in mind, knowing that there's no real negative effects, I will say that there have been many positive benefits of timing your protein before, during, and after exercise. So this is especially with weight training and especially with aging, because with aging, what happens is you get what's called anabolic resistance. Basically, that means that you're resistant to the effects of building or maintaining muscle mass. And so whereas let's say a 20-year-old can take 30 grams of protein and they can build all the muscle they want, it might take an older woman or man more protein to be able to do the same amount of building because they're a bit more resistant compared to the younger population. Another consideration that somebody said in the chat is exercising fasted. And I love this topic. I forgot to look up the paper right before this, but there was something that came out just recently in the past year or 2 years from Texas Christian Women's College, something like that. But it was a collaborating lab from my lab at Florida State University. And they were doing a lot of research on this exercise fasted thing, because the dogma is that bodybuilders or people that were really concerned with body fat, fat mass and cutting, thought that if they did their cardio in the morning and they were fasted on their cardio, they would be able to release more fat and their body would then burn that fat. And in general, if there are any positive effects, it's very minimal, but it could be good. So fasting, exercise fasting, or exercise during fasting is basically what's happening is that your body is releasing all these hormones, and those hormones are going to attach themselves to your fat cells, and then your fat cells are going to release fat, because that is your body's first source of fuel, because you don't have as much readily available glucose. So it's not like you go in there, you eat a candy bar and you go work out, and then the candy bar is what's being used for energy. Your body is in a fasted state, so all that stuff is stored in your muscle. So I'm going to tap into my fat first, or at the same time as that muscle glycogen. And so you could get some body fat loss. And this is specific to aerobic type of training. So if you are that person that goes and walks with your girlfriend or your friends or your family for low intensity activity, or you go cycle for low intensity activity, this might be a good way for you to optimize your body composition in terms of losing fat. What I will say is that there is some research out there too that shows that eating protein before working out will elicit just about the same effects. So you'll get just about the same body fat loss, and at the same time, you'll be able to maintain your muscle mass greater. So if you're choosing between going fasted or eating, in particular, if you can't work out on a fasted, in a fasted state, like if you get GI issues or an upset stomach, a protein shake or a protein bar or something that's well tolerated before exercise is probably a good idea. And I wanted to show you this. This is from what's called Precision Nutrition. If you've never heard of them, they are an incredible resource. John Berardi is the guy that wrote this. It's basically a textbook, but almost all of the information within the textbook is available free online. So if you have any nutrition questions, if you look into Precision Nutrition, they'll likely be able to answer your questions. Now, this is like a knockoff of a My Plate, and My Plate is a very general plate, a picture of a plate that shows you about how much you should eat. And what we were talking about before with carbohydrate timing and with all that stuff, John Berardi and Precision Nutrition took the original My Plate and they designed it so that you can see the meals that you would eat anytime throughout the day, and then compare that to what you would eat for a post-workout meal. And so you can see, if we look at protein, at any time of day, you're including protein at about a quarter of your plate. That's about the size of your palm, maybe the size of your whole hand if you're eating something like fish. But then after a workout, you want to cover about half your plate with protein. Of course, because you want to recover better, your muscles need those amino acids from your protein to be able to recover. In addition to protein, you can see that veggies are going to cover more than half of your plate here during your anytime meal. So this basically looks like a salad. If you're not in that about 3-hour window after exercise. And then comparing that to half of your plate, adding fruit in there after your workout so that you get those really, really good sources of sugars to be able to properly restore your carbohydrate storage form, which is glycogen. And then lastly, or one of the last things, you can see fat, that covers about 1/8 of your plate in your anytime meal. And over here, you can see starches. So that is really good, again, for restocking your muscle after workout. Now, last thing, I know we're sort of limited on time, so I'm going to blaze right through it, but bedtime is one of my favorite things to talk about. And we're going to skip this, but I think I know all of your responses here. The whole don't eat before protein or don't eat before bed type of thing is running rampant or has been running rampant recently. But I'll explain why that this is not necessarily good practice. Bedtime or pre-sleep eating is what we call it. And this time provides a huge window that we're not eating. And if we're not eating, we're in a fasted state. And if we're in a fasted state, we're in a perpetual cycle of breakdown. So our body, because we're not taking in nutrients, is actually breaking down our tissue, and specifically our muscle tissue, to be able to fuel all the other necessary organs like your brain, all the other things. And because of fear of eating during the evening for things like body composition and overall health, most people don't eat during these times. And it's really because media moguls, like I said in the beginning, have taken some studies, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. They've skewed and slandered these studies and then said, do not eat at night. And it's actually not true. So the research that's available that these media moguls took and slandered was in night shift workers and individuals with disordered nighttime eating. And it's so interesting because what these populations do is that they're awake during these nighttime hours. And so you could argue the whole, your hormones are shifting, all that stuff, but really their dietary practices and their activity levels are what's drastically different compared to a normal population that's awake during normal hours. So these two populations are eating huge amounts of calories in the evening hours. If you've ever worked night shift, typically it's not like you have the most healthy options available unless you bring in your own food. They're also eating really, really high amounts of carbohydrates and fats. So they're very carbohydrate, very fat dense foods. And so these populations would, in several studies, have shown that they will progressively increase their body weight, their body composition will be affected. They'll see issues with things like insulin resistance and all of those things. And so like I said, media moguls took it, they slandered it, and they said it was bad. And this is just a short diagram to say this top, any of the green that you see is when your muscles, your body is building. Any of the red is when you're breaking down. And so this right here is like the bedtime or your pre-sleep area. If you don't eat before bed, you're in this constant state of body breakdown or muscle breakdown. And so if you eat before, you typically, the theory is that you'll have all this building that's happening during sleep. And so there are a number of studies that have come out in the recent years. I think 2013 or 2014 was when it started to become big in the research world. And really our lab at Florida State University and another lab over in the Netherlands were two of the piloting labs that talked about this. Our lab specifically worked with resting metabolism and with fat metabolism. The lab in the Netherlands did amazing work with muscle protein metabolism. But we found that it increases resting metabolic rate the next morning, or may increase your resting metabolic rates. Basically, wake up, burning more calories if you eat protein before bed. It doesn't affect fat release or fat burn, which is one of the reasons why people don't eat at night, because they think that they're going to be gaining fat. But at the acute level, at least overnight and the next morning acutely, it doesn't negatively affect your body's ability to release fat. And it also doesn't negatively affect your fat burn. It also improves muscle recovery after exercise. There's incredible studies with this, and I encourage you to look into them. But if you exercise, you eat protein at night, your body is better able to recover if you didn't eat anything right before sleep. And it prevents muscle protein breakdown specific to aging, really, really important. Increases muscle protein building, doesn't negatively affect metabolic markers of health, like things like insulin, things like glucose. And it increases your next morning satiety and decreases hunger. Basically, you don't feel as hungry and you feel more satisfied waking up the next morning. You don't have the desire, the urge to eat. So this, I wanted to show you are some pictures. This is from my PhD work, me with short hair, but this is a technique called microdialysis. What we take is this really wide diameter needle and we stick it in your fat, and the probe that stays in your fat is semi-perfusible, which basically means that it looks like a cheese grater. It has the ability to perfuse stuff into your fat. And then we also have the ability to collect stuff from your fat into little vials. And then we can assess the stuff that we pull from your fat to give us an indicator of the rate that you're metabolizing fat. So this is a really, really cool technique, and you can do it in any tissue, but we do it in fat. Basically, with that technique, what we found is that, this is one of the papers that came from it, that if you eat before bed, so this is, let me orient you, these two on the left are the fat metabolism overnight, so those 8 hours that you're sleeping. These two on the right are your next morning metabolism, so as soon as you wake up, what the rate that you're releasing fat. And the black bars are when you eat protein at night. The hashed bars are when you're eating a non-caloric placebo that tastes the same. And what you can see is that there's no difference in fat release in any of the circumstances. So you can eat protein before bed and it doesn't affect your body's ability to release fat. And these findings were consistent in an overweight and obese population too. So that's encouraging because you can get all those benefits from eating before bed and you don't have to worry about it affecting your fat release. And down here is glucose too. So it doesn't affect your glucose, indicating that there's no negative, at least from what we know, there's limited negative impact, cardiometabolic impact. So the practical application here is if you're deciding to eat before bed, which I encourage you to do, you want to make sure that it's a protein-rich source. And I always recommend Dymatize if you're looking at protein. If anybody asks me about protein, I will say Dymatize. This is the protein that I take and that I encourage people to take. It's also the protein that we use in all of our studies. They're a really, really cool, amazing company out of Texas, and we work pretty closely with them. So this is the protein that I would encourage you to take. It's called casein. So casein, we won't get into the nuts and bolts of it all, but casein is basically a slow digesting protein. So when you take it, because you have such a big window during the evening hours, the idea is that it gets released into your blood and there's sort of this slow taper in amino acids throughout an extended period, rather than taking another form of protein, which would rapidly increase your amino acids or the proteins in your blood. So this is better for evening hours. And I will say from another practical level and experience level, casein is a little bit thicker. So sometimes if you blend it up with like ice and water or ice and milk, it actually tastes like a milkshake. So it's pretty good. Also protein bars, you want to go for low sugar options. So there's some really good options out there. I forgot to put pictures, but one bar, like the number one spelled out, is a great resource. There's also some other ones too, but you definitely want to go for low sugar protein bar options. We have done some work in our lab with cottage cheese, which is a whole food source that's high in casein protein. So if you like that, you can take that option. Cottage cheese is great. Milk and yogurt are okay options, but if you have them available, I would say, yeah, go for it for sure. They're a little bit lower on the protein content, but could be a good option. You want to make sure whatever you eat, it's about 200 calories, which is snack size. Typically, a scoop of protein will give you exactly what you need. So in general, this is the wrap up. Try to avoid too many carbs if you're non-active or on non-active days. And like we talked about before, this is not talking about things like fruits and vegetables and legumes. You want to get a fair amount, 2 fistful at almost every meal. But the really sugary, starchy carbs you want to avoid if you have a non-active or a low active day, or if you're non-active in general. And if you're eating those starchy carbs, you want to time them in the 3-hour window after exercise for optimal recovery and good benefits with body composition. Try getting your protein around exercise if you don't already, and definitely start thinking about protein before bed. All right. And I would like to hear, as you're processing all this to end, what you're thinking about changing in your current diet. If you'd like to type that in the chat. If not, don't worry about it. And then this is my social media information. If you want to follow me, these are my professional social media. And I post things like some research and all the good stuff. So definitely follow me on these platforms if you'd like. And I forgot to put it in here already. too, but my email I'll send in the chat if you ever want to have conversation before.
Brittany, I have a question.
Yeah.
It's Chris. I maybe it depends upon quote the top. Yesterday I ate last 2 days I had more pizza than I should have. So it was great, but I think, you know, but is pizza really a bad food, or is it more dependent upon the toppings that you have on that pizza and how many slices of pizza? I mean, if you have like two slices of Hawaiian pizza, is that really bad?
So I'll start by saying, Chris, that what I don't like to talk about foods as being inherently bad or good.
Mm-hmm.
Realistically, what you need for optimal health are calories. And so any food, whether it's a Snickers bar, a piece of pizza, or a piece of fruit, are going to be able to provide you calories. And in that sense, they're healthy. But what we want to talk about, what we more so want to talk about is how nutritious they are. So per unit of measurement, how many nutrients do they provide? How many vitamins, minerals, fiber, all those things. And so I will say that, of course, protein is not your best nutritious option, but in what you're saying, to give credence to what you're saying, I think that as long as you keep your carbohydrate intake amount at a reasonable amount, which I would say probably for you is 1 to 2 slices of pizza and no more, it's not gonna put a pin in, so to speak. So as long as you don't do that, first, as long as you don't consistently eat protein or pizza every single day, and second, as long as you don't binge eat that pizza in one sitting, I think you'll be fine.
It sounds good.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So thanks, Britt. Are there any other questions for Brittany before I ask? Oh, here's a question, Brittany, in the chat. Do you want to read it so that someone is recorded, because the chat?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, do you want? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I've been learning about protein and looking at how to add protein whey in my diet. Is that casein? So first, to answer your question, that's what I was talking about the slow and the fast digesting proteins. Casein is, or casein, however you want to say it, is the slow digesting form, the one that you probably want to get before bed. And then whey is the fast digesting protein. So they're the ones that are going to release protein and amino acids really quick into your blood. And those whey proteins are typically the ones that you want to get around exercise, because they're going to give you that huge amount of amino acids quickly. And how and when to get protein and how much for seniors that are active. Okay, so you've been doing the research. How much for seniors? Try Kodiak. Too much sugar. This is great. Okay. I don't see the question in there. Renee, is there a question, or is that just a comment? How much sugar is too much? Okay, how much sugar is too much sugar? Well, if we're talking about sugar specifically, really, we don't have there's no general consensus with the recommendation for sugars. So there is no actual recommendation for the amount of sugar that you need to get. Now, with carbohydrates, if you're thinking about meals, I think like I mentioned before, about 2 fistful is typically the amount or the serving amount that you're going to want for each of your carbohydrate portions. But if you're looking at sugar, like I think what you mentioned, Kodiak chocolate muffins with high protein, in general, I try to avoid any and all of those nutrient bars and things like that have high sugar, because I mean, you can really think about them as glorified candy bars. They're basically a candy bar with added protein. So if you have the option to opt for low carbohydrate or low sugar protein bar options, like I said, one bar is great. Quest is another really good low sugar protein bar. I would recommend those over eating anything with high sugar. I don't know much about Kodiak though. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions for Dr. Allman? It was a great talk. So I do have a science-based kind of question based on something Dr. Borsheim presented during her talk. So in her talk, her paper had just come out about like eating too close to evening and could be bad for fat deposition. And then so when you're talking about eating before bed, is that in terms of like physical activity or muscle growing? Like, because it's kind of contradictory to maybe some of the data she showed in her talk.
Can you tell me more about that? Do you know
I
what
think her paper was just basically, they did like the labeled palmitate, and it was in a really small sample size, and they found like the closer people ate to bed, they were more likely to sort of have incorporation of the palmitate into body fat. Sorry, my cat is me in
let me ask you, do they do muscle biopsies, or were they just looking at your?
No, I can't really remember. I mean, it was picked up in the popular press and of course turned into something that like the data just really didn't say. But it was just saying like if you eat before mealtime, it could be worse for your body composition than not. But it was not in like physically active resistance trained people.
Yeah. What I will say, I'm gonna have to look into that first off, because it depends. Like if it was labeled palmitate and we're infusing it in versus dietary palmitate, then it might be a little bit different. But at least what our lab was able to show is that with eating before bed and protein-rich snacks, like I said before, is an important thing to consider. Doesn't affect your body's ability to release fat from your fat cells. It also doesn't negatively affect your fat oxidation. And that was just indirect calorimetry, so it's super basic. We look at where you are, but so that's all I know with that. I'm gonna have to look up and follow.
I mean, because I know right now the eating before bedtime is sort of like the hot new, or more and more research is coming out about it. So
yeah, but I think it's important to scrutinize the data too, because a lot of those studies are not giving them protein-rich snacks. It's a lot of the studies that provided the foundation for my research provided them meals, large meals right before bed that were rich in carbohydrate in addition to moderate amounts of protein. So it's all really important to consider when you're looking into options.
And then Mary has one question: how many grams of sugar is high in a protein bar?
I think that varies about the way that you think about it. I particularly don't like any sugar in my protein bars. Like I said, I consider it like a candy bar with extra protein if I do, but I don't know, 10 to 15 grams might be a little bit too high.
Or maybe thinking of it in terms of percentages too. Might be a way, which would require some math.
Yeah, it would be.
But I would say trying to stay below 40% carbohydrate.
And another thing,
meal replacement, post-exercise recovery, it might be different.
Another thing to consider too, like let's say you only have options that have sugar in it, is to make sure that there's enough protein in it. Because what I do know about the bars that are a lot of the bars that are relatively high in sugars is that they're also lower in protein. And so if you're getting a bar that has, let's say 10 grams of protein, that's likely not going to be exactly what you need or what's going to be best for you. So choose a bar that's a little bit higher in protein, like 20 to 25 grams. And I think that's probably a better place to be.
With another comment that a boiled egg before bed for people who work out could be a possibility. And that's, I mean, it is 7 grams of protein and a low source of carbs, or a source of lower carbohydrates. So yeah, that could be one option too.
Yeah, for sure. Eggs are like nature's multivitamin, so it might be really good.
Can I ask one last question? If it's, hopefully it's applicable, but I don't know if I understand it or not. Can you explain to me the concept of counting macros? And is that important, or is that just a matter of protein, vegetables, and fruit or something?
Yeah, counting macros, a lot of people do follow it. You have a whole day, you have a certain amount of carbs, fats, and proteins to get in. And basically you're trying to, in the scope of that day, get to the certain number that you need and try not to surpass it. And so there's apps for it. And what I would say is that if you eat based on those 2 plates that I showed you, that's going to give you exactly what you need without having to do all the math and digging into those apps and things like that. So do you ask for a certain reason, or?
Well, the reason I ask is because over the past year and a half or so, it's been mentioned to me so many times. And I understand the concept of, okay, this food is primarily protein. This is a fruit. This is a vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
That's as much as I understand. I don't, like it's almost like what percentage of this is protein compared to what percentage of it is carb compared to what percent. And I just get lost along the way. And I wish I had a firm understanding of it if it could help me.
Yeah. And that it definitely can be confusing for sure. So I hear you on that. To not get tangled up in the weeds, like I said, I think the best thing for you at this point, Chris, would be to try to eat to the plate. Mm-hmm. So the proportions that we talked about and that you saw, try to get those in, because that will give you exactly what you need in general.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, Chris, so I had to actually ask a student in my lab this because I'm sometimes social media slow. Counting macros is, I think, just something invented by the social media influencer world. It's just paying attention to the grams of carbohydrate, protein, and fat in your diet. It's macronutrients. So I think at first I was like, am I missing something here? What the heck is counting macros? But I think it's also used a lot in the bodybuilding world right now by a lot of these influencers that I kind of keep track of on Facebook that I know, or Instagram. So I think it's doing what, like Dr. Allman said, and following one of those plates. And I mean, I think it's calorie for most of us who are not elite athletes or, regular resistance trainers. Calories is what's most important.
Yeah, it's a matter of you have a certain caloric intake and where are you getting your calories from. I think they just made that term up to confuse people, to make people think they needed them or something like that. I don't know. It's so, as you said, I think it's really a simple concept that was pushed out on everyone and kind of made them feel confused. I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah. Like Jamie said, it's a really good tool for bodybuilders, because what I know from my friends that did the count the macros thing is that it would be 6 p.m. and they would still have 50 grams of carbs that they could eat. And the way that count your macros works is that the source of what you're eating doesn't necessarily matter compared to how much you're eating. So if you have, let's say, 50 carbs left in your day, or 50 grams of carbs left in your day, the idea is that some of the people would be like, oh, I can eat whatever I want. So they would have like a pancake or a candy bar or something like that. So that's what it was. It gives you a cap, and then you try not to go over that cap. So it was good, like Jamie said, for bodybuilders and people that are lifting. But
and I know we had an email question about when to eat with bodybuilding, and I think that's something. It's two, to me, different nutritional populations: people that are lifting to be cut and maybe perform or compete, versus everyone else that just wants to have a healthier lifestyle. So, anyway. Well, we're already 20 minutes over because it's an exciting topic. So thank you for sticking with us, those of you who are able. Next week, we're going to talk about vegan and vegetarian eating patterns. And the slides and fast facts will be posted on our website. Oh, and also on our YouTube channel, we've been asking for a lot of healthy recipes. So the Exercises Medicine group had invited me to do a healthy cooking with ramen noodles demonstration. So we recorded it and it's posted on our YouTube channel. My first time doing a cooking demonstration, so no judging, please. Anyway, take care. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.